You're going to be out of here in 20 minutes, and so I'm going to talk for 19 of those 20 minutes. To capture, if you would, the first issue I want to talk about, it actually requires me to explain to you why it is I'm in a wheelchair and what I learned from that. I know there are some people like Susan Reed and others who know the story well, but I see so many new faces in the room. You probably don't know the story. What happened is I had just graduated from law school and moved to Houston, where I had taken a job at a law firm and was studying for the bar exam. And on a summer day, I went out for a jog. And while I was out jogging, a huge 80-foot oak tree crashed down on my back, fractured my vertebrae into my spinal cord, leaving me forever paralyzed and needing to use the wheelchair that I remain in today. And every time I tell that story, people are shaking their heads wondering, how slow was that guy jogging to get hit by a falling tree? But there are lessons that you learn from things like that. As I went on and became a lawyer, became a judge, became a Supreme Court justice, and now Attorney General, I learned what many of you already know. And that is that our lives are not defined by how we're challenged. Instead, we define our lives by the way that respond to the challenges that come our way. That is so true in the businesses that you work on every single day. You have a lot of challenges that could define you. You have budgetary challenges, you have challenges involving employees, you have challenges in access to capital, challenges with regard to customer service, challenges with regard to trying to figure out what the next big thing will be that you want your company to create and offer into the marketplace. Well, the point is that one is that you're defined in part by how you respond to those challenges and deal with them and move forward. But the second is that there's no doubt about it, all of you will confront many challenges on the pathway to achieving success in your businesses. But the key takeaway I want you to leave today with is knowing the perspective in Austin, Texas. And that is, whatever those challenges may be, we in Austin want to ensure that you know that government is not and should not be one of those challenges. Now, we understand that government plays an essential role in so many areas. Things like water, education, infrastructure, the electrical grid, things like law enforcement are things that government has a responsibility to provide. But that said, Texas has a healthy respect for the limits that government should play, and also a deep and abiding respect for the power of the individual. That's why the Texas model is premised on things like not having an income tax, like the litigation reforms you've seen permeate the state over the past decade, like the fact that we strive for a reasonable regulatory environment that allows businesses to operate with that sense of predictability that you need in order to attain a profit, and why Texas continues to be a right-to-work state, so that we can avoid the union abuses that you see in so many other regions across the country. Bottom line is that Texas has implemented a model that's premised on allowing you, not government, to be the driving force in this state. And what we're seeing is that the numbers that you have racked up in being the driving force in this state are incredibly impressive. Today, Texas is the 13th largest economy in the world. Texas has been the #1 exporting state in this country for 10 years running. CEO Magazine said that Texas has been the top state to do business for 8 years in a row. You've heard before that Texas created more jobs over the past decade than all the other 49 states combined. Well, in the aftermath of the recession, maybe what's happened in the state is even more impressive, because we've already regained all the jobs that were lost during the recession and then added more back on top of that. Well, South Texas and San Antonio are major contributors to this success story. And you don't have to look any further than the dramatic Eagle Ford Shale play. Eagle Ford Shale alone supports about 50,000 jobs right now, and that likely will double to more than 100,000 over the course of the next decade. Last year alone, Eagle Ford Shale contributed $25 billion in economic impact on this region. San Antonio is already home to 5 of the Fortune 500 companies and 3 of Fortune's best 100 companies to work for. Unfortunately, these job creation policies that are fostered here in Texas are being challenged by a growing wave of government mandates coming out of Washington, D.C. And it's that threat to the economy, stimulated by these government mandates, that threaten not only the pocketbooks of businesses, but also individual prosperity in Texas and across the nation, that is part of the reason behind these lawsuits that I've brought, challenging Obamacare and challenging the EPA. Let me briefly explain the Obamacare lawsuit. This is a lawsuit that Texas brought with several other states, challenging the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, which has a real long title. For easy use purposes, I will call it Obamacare. You need to understand our lawsuit against Obamacare doesn't have anything to do with health care. The lawsuit doesn't have anything to do with health insurance. The lawsuit is focused on one primary thing, and that is the individual mandate. In Obamacare, there is a provision that is unprecedented in American history. It's that mandate that Congress inserted that compels all Americans to go out and purchase a product whether you want to or not. And if you refuse to make that purchase, you're subject to a penalty imposed by the IRS. Well, the fact is, because that is unprecedented, if it is upheld, it creates a new tool, a new pathway for Congress to be empowered like it's never been empowered before. And they can make you go out and purchase virtually anything that Congress deems is necessary in order to help the economy. Now, some people say, listen, you know, this health care thing is really important. It affects so much of our economy. It permeates the aspect of everyone's lives. And I'll tell you, there are 4 things in our lives that you access more frequently than health care that are just as needed, if not more needed, than health care. Food, water, clothing, and shelter. Can Congress make you go out and purchase all those items? Not because you need them or want them, but in order to help spread the cost to make access to food and shelter more affordable? It's a great, noble idea, just like Obamacare is a great, noble idea. But however noble the cause may be, it doesn't mean Congress has the authority to trample the Constitution in order to achieve that noble goal. Don't look to me to tell you that. Look to Barack Obama. In 2008, when he was running for president, when the issue of the individual mandate came up at that time, brought up by one of his opponents, he said, listen, the individual mandate is really not all that sensible or not that easy to impose. If the individual mandate were that easy, then he could solve homelessness by forcing all Americans to go out and purchase a home. This shows the potentially disastrous limits to giving Congress the power to impose things like an individual mandate. Well, it's these kinds of issues that were raised by the justices on the United States Supreme Court the last week in March when I was up there for 3 days of oral arguments. Those 3 days were historic in and of themselves. Every argument before the Supreme Court is 1 hour long. I've argued a very important case up there defending the Ten Commandments monument on the Texas Capitol grounds, which had an impact not just in Texas but across the entire nation. I thought it was an important case. The Supreme Court thought it was important enough to have oral arguments, but they limited us to 1 hour. I've been up there on multiple cases, all of which lasted 1 hour. This case wasn't allotted 1 hour or 1 day, but instead 3 days. The last time the Supreme Court devoted that much time to a case was a half a century ago. And that's telling because it shows how significant this case is for its impact on the Constitution and the future direction of this country with regard to the way the Constitution will be applied and enforced. Well, the way the argument went is, on day one, we dealt with more like a procedural matter. On day two, we got into the issue of the individual mandate. And if you look at the commentators in the media, they had predicted, even after day one of oral argument, the final decision would be 8-1, maybe 7-2, in favor of upholding Obamacare. After the second day of oral argument, they said this case had turned into a train wreck for Obamacare and its future. After day 3 of the oral argument, they changed that and said that the case had changed from a train wreck to a plane crash. And the reason why they said that is because of the questioning that was coming from the bench. The pivotal vote on the United States Supreme Court is Justice Kennedy. And he said that Obamacare realigned the equation and the relationship between the individual and government. Chief Justice Roberts brought up all these hypotheticals that I was talking about future powers Congress would have if Obamacare was upheld. Justice Scalia raised what he considered to be an impossible task that was being foisted upon the United States Supreme Court. Obamacare law itself has 2,700 pages. Justice Scalia said, you being the lawyer for the government, you expect us to read all these 2,700 pages and decide which provision should live and which provision should be stricken down? He said it's something the court will not do, which raises an even more interesting fact about the legislative world that we live in today. And that is, Obamacare is a law that's 2,700 pages long that no one in the entire country has read. And yet it's expected to be followed and applied and implemented by the very businessmen and women who are in this room today. Well, the practical issues of Obamacare are just as profound as the legal challenges. Because what we're seeing in the business community is that hiring is hampered and expansion is limited because of increased regulation, increased cost, and increased uncertainty. I've talked to business leaders here in San Antonio who've decried the implementation of this law on their businesses. I've talked to multiple restaurant owners who say they simply are not going to be able to afford to implement the mandates of Obamacare because they operate on such thin margins. I've talked to doctors here in San Antonio who say they're getting out of the practice of medicine because of the regulatory nightmare this is putting on their medical practice. And those same themes are repeated not just across Bexar County, but across the entire state of Texas. And I challenge you this. You all probably have heard other doctors and physicians saying they're going to leave the practice of medicine. I challenge you to name a single person who says because of Obamacare, they're going to get into the practice of medicine. That person doesn't exist, which shows another challenge we're going to be dealing with in trying to implement this law, and that is there will be fewer doctors available to provide a much greater demand for government-provided health care services. Well, we also see the threat of an out-of-control federal government in the policies and actions of the EPA. Some of you heard these policies and actions crystallized a couple of weeks ago in a videotape that was played of the regional director for the EPA, a man named Al Armendariz, who was caught on tape talking to a meeting in a room about half the size where he was talking about the philosophy that permeated their enforcement process at the EPA. He said the EPA's theme was to act like the Romans in medieval times. When they raided a village, they found the first 5 people they came across and they crucified them to make an example to the remainder of the villagers to coerce them into compliance. And that was their goal for businesses, especially in the energy sector, here in the state of Texas. Well, it's that very kind of philosophy, that departure from a reasonable and fair application of the law, that we've been fighting against when we've been bringing our legal actions against the EPA. I filed 12 lawsuits against the EPA in a wide range of issues, ranging from challenging drilling bans to challenging greenhouse gas regulations, all of which have been aimed at stopping the EPA from running roughshod over economic progress in order for it to pursue its own radical agenda. Well, I submit to you that the Washington elites are all wrong in their underlying philosophy when they insist that economic progress and environmental preservation cannot coexist. Because during that very same decade, when Texas created more jobs than all the other 49 states combined, Texas also reduced ozone pollution more than any other state. And you don't have to leave San Antonio to find the perfect illustration of this success. You're one of the fastest growing metro areas in the entire country. And yet San Antonio is also the nation's largest city that's in compliance with air pollution standards. San Antonio attained this status without the EPA's burdensome new mandates. You did it under the very Texas regulatory policies that are now being challenged by the EPA. So Texas has proven that you can have it both ways. You can protect the environment and create jobs both at the same time. And all we need are for these unnecessary regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. to get out of the way and let states like Texas lead the way. Well, the big question out of these lawsuits is whether or not we're going to invest even more power in an already bulging federal government that wants to tax more, spend more, and regulate more, or will that power in this country remain in the businesses that actually create the jobs in this economy? Well, the lawsuits that we filed show that Texas has made its choice. Texas is picking to side with the business leaders in this state. We're saying that it should be you, the businesses and job creators, that are the driving force in this state. And the reason for that is very simple. It's because the future of this state, as well as the future of this nation, depends upon your ongoing commitment and unwavering dedication to the free enterprise system. You all have proven to be exceptional business leaders. You're proven to have excelled at making profits for your companies, and in return, making Texas a more prosperous state. You've accomplished this not because of any government mandates, but because of innovation, because of ingenuity, because of the free enterprise system that celebrates success and the rewards that go along with it. In contrast, the political and societal graveyard are filled with governments that promise too much, try to do too much, and failed spectacularly. Now, the modern version that people like to point to are countries like Greece and all the other European nations that are in the midst of what seems to be a collapse. But you don't have to look overseas to see that level of governmental failure. You can look at it right here domestically. Look at the city of Detroit, whose population was cut in half and then cut in half again. Or look at the state we like to point finger at the most, the state of California. California is on the brink of becoming Greece, precisely because it has adopted a model that is the exact opposite of the model that we've adopted here in the state of Texas. California is actually driving businesses to other states because it has built an unsustainable welfare state premised upon higher taxes, expanding entitlement benefits, and onerous regulations. The social consequences of the California model have proven to be disastrous. The number of Medicaid recipients in California has grown almost as much as the population itself. California represents about 12% of the nation's population, and yet about a third of the nation's welfare beneficiaries. The prison population in California is growing almost as fast as the number of income tax payers, and the unemployment rate remains one of the highest in the nation. It's no wonder that California has been named the worst state in the country to do business for 8 years running. Well, the bottom line is this. The future of this country is not going to be found in the government hallways of Sacramento or Washington, D.C., or even in Austin, Texas. Instead, the future of this country is going to be found in rooms like this, rooms that are filled with entrepreneurs in the free enterprise system that have made this country and that will determine its future. America's greatest advancements spring from the minds of innovators, not regulators. The Eagle for Shell and the new boom in energy production is a typical example. There's a clear result of both innovation and new technology, not a result of new onerous regulations. In less than a decade in the Eagle for Shell, they've revolutionized energy production. That's unlocked what could be a century worth of energy. That's going to be cleaner energy and makes us less dependent on foreign sources of energy. Or think about companies like Apple, Google, Facebook, or your very own Rackspace, all of which have revolutionized the technology world that we live in today. Those innovations by those companies didn't come about because of government mandates. They didn't come about because government chose between winners and losers. They came about because of innovators at those companies who pursued the system that was allowed by free enterprise. Well, 10 years from now, we'll be talking about other products. Your iPhone will be so old last decade by then. There'll be something new that people will be using. What will those products be? Who will create them? The answer is, I don't have a clue. My hope, though, is that it will be someone in this room who's the creator of those new products, those new services that our consumers demand. What I do know is this. The answer for those new products and services will not be in the hallways of government in Austin or Washington or any other capital around the globe. If we're waiting for more government mandates to create these products, then we're doomed. If, however, you continue to innovate, then this country will continue to thrive for generations to come. So thank you all for making the future brighter for San Antonio, for Texas, and for the United States, and for continuing to remind us what the American dream is all about. Thank you so much. May God bless you all and the great state of Texas.